Like they call it the doghouse.
So in a few days, we are finally going to get the fight that we all wanted. Errol Spence Jr. and Terence Bud Crawford for all the marbles at 147. And this is a fight that's been there long in the making, as we all know. And what I thought I'd do is, this fight has so many twists and turns along the way. A lot of it resembled sort of the sort of build up between Mayweather and Pacquiao, where we kind of felt like it wasn't going to happen. A lot of people felt like it was going to be a one of those fights that we never got, that it was one that got away, that these two were going to fight when they were like 100 years old. Either way, we're finally getting it, and I kind of want to go through these events or the timeline of what has happened. And I did a similar thing a while back with Amir Khan and Kell Brook, and I think some fights have this thing where there's so much that goes on that you kind of almost need to sit back and almost look at everything, because it is crazy how long this fight has been brewing for. Hasn't really been as long as people make it out to be. I think since about 2018. I know it's long, but it wasn't as if it's been 10 years as what Mayweather Pacquiao was, and especially not what will happen with Amir Khan and Kell Brook. You know, Bud Crawford and Errol Spence are both in the prime of their careers, so I don't think we're really missing out on this one. I think they both are fine at the exact right time, so looking forward to this one. But what I'm going to do is recount and go through the timeline events between Errol Spence and Terence Crawford. So I want to kind of start in like 2017, really, because I think this is probably the most appropriate time, I feel, to go through, because it was at this point. So if you look at, first of all, look at Errol Spence and Terence Crawford as fighters beforehand. Errol Spence was an Olympian, as was Terence Crawford. Both were kind of, I would say, fighters who, Spence definitely, I would say, had more hype. Crawford slowly building his name, and Crawford kind of got his name from, obviously people knew him through his sort of switch hitting style, and he was somebody who's, you know, switch hitters are very, they're a rarity in boxing, because not many boxing trainers like you to go with either hand. They kind of like you to stick to one and keep it at one. But then, you know, with Terence Crawford though, there was a few things about Crawford which I think really stood out. Like I said, his hand speed, I think, was very good. His power, very good. And his ability to switch has always been something that has always followed him throughout his career. And, you know, Crawford really built his name. I think the one fight that really sort of announced Crawford to the world is, you know, the fight where he stepped in on short notice to fight Brady Prescott. And this was back in like 2013, when Crawford was really on the rise. And I think this fight got everybody speaking, because obviously Prescott had a name. He'd obviously people known for beating Amir Khan, knocking him out in the first round. And in the fight, Crawford won a unanimous decision. And then a few fights after that, Crawford then went to fight Ricky Burns in Scotland, and ended up also beating him, and ended up capturing the WBO title. And I think this was sort of when everybody was looking at Crawford as one of the best. And then, as time went on, Crawford then went to beat Gamboa. He went to beat Beltran, Delorme. He went to really make his name. He made his name at 135, and then we all know made his name at 140. But as of 2017, this is where it started to get interesting for both fights, because Spence was a very young fighter at the time when Crawford was sort of on the come up. He was, you know, very young. I think he was about making his name in the Olympics, and sort of he had the name around boxing Jim Spence because he had he had given Floyd Mayweather hell in sparring him. You know, Floyd rarely ever talks about guys in sparring, but the way he bigs up Spence, you listen to him in interviews on how that sparring was, it shows you, you know, he'd just come out of prison at the time, Floyd, but the fact that Spence really put it on him. And I'm not saying Spence would have beaten Floyd, but I would wonder how those two, what would happen in the prime. I know people would assume that Floyd would play with Spence, and I don't completely disagree, but, you know, I do wonder, because Spence has I think stylistically Spence would be a horrible fight for Floyd, because Spence, once a southpaw, he's a big southpaw, and somebody who does not leave you alone, similar to Maidana, but with a very a more calculated type of pressure. So I think that fight would be horrible for Floyd. But either way, Spence made his name, and everybody in the US got excited about Spence. They all saw how good he was. He was destroying competition left and right, and again, he was somebody who had a lot of hype. Him and Crawford were both seen as two fighters who, there's a difference sometimes when you watch fighters who kind of end up becoming these great fighters. Like Tyson Fury, for example. People who obviously knew will tell you how great he was, but he was never seen by the major boxing sort of fraternity as this elite level heavyweight who could become that. He kind of had to come into the scene and become that. He almost forced his way through. And with Spence and Crawford, however, it's not the same thing. Those two were seen from very, very early as being special talents. And, Spence made his name, 2015 beat Le Greco, Van Herden, then he just made his name slowly, beat Chris Algier, which was a massive win, then 2016 beat Leonard Bundu, and after these sort of fights, Spence had then worked himself up into a mandatory position, and this is where we now begin this, because now 2017 was the big year. So if I look at Errol Spence first of all, what he was doing, Errol Spence had the fight with Kell Brook, Bramall Lane in Sheffield, had for the IBF welterweight title, had all the stuff against him, home court advantage for Brook. Brook was the more experienced fighter. He never lost at 147 at that point. He'd fought Golovkin and lost, but a lot of people, he may as well have got a win because the way people were kind of bigging him up after the fight. Obviously took on Golovkin when nobody was trying to fight Golovkin. And coming back then, he had to fight Errol Spence. And horrendous management from Eddie Hearn, in my opinion. You imagine you fight Golovkin and Spence back to back. It is not exactly the nicest of matchups. And I think a lot of people felt that Spence would win. Spence was the favourite, I think, coming into the fight. I personally thought Brook might have took it because, being a Brit, you always want to back your own. And I also kind of felt like maybe it would be, maybe the fight would be too soon for Spence or whatever. But one thing about Spence, I never had this feeling in the fight. I was very much thinking that Brook was doing well in that fight, but I always had this sense of doom. I just knew Spence was going to end up beating him because Spence is just too seasoned and too good, I felt, for him to lose, and it just felt like his time, really. And in the fight, Errol Spence ended up beating Kell Brook. Kell Brook took the knee, and Errol Spence ended up becoming the IBF welterweight champion. On the other side, Terence Bud Crawford, 2017, fought Felix Diaz and fought Julius Indongo. Ended up becoming, Crawford, the undisputed champion at 140 pounds. Beat Diaz with this corner essentially stopping the fight, and then beat Ndongo by knocking him out. It was Ndongo was a very poor performance from Ndongo. Didn't really show anything in that fight, but Crawford showed how good he was, his speed, his accuracy, his power. He hasn't got physically, if you look at the two of them, Spence looks more muscular, but Crawford has very, very, I think people know that he's got power, but I think he's a deceptively hard hitter, Crawford. But no doubt, incredible year for both guys. One becoming a world champion and one becoming an undisputed champion. And then we then get to 2018, and this is when the fight starts spicing up. So 2018, Errol Spence was set to fight Lamont Peterson for his first title defense at 147 pounds, and Terence Crawford made the move up to 147 and was fighting Jeff Horn for the WBO belt. Now, it's probably earlier footage of this, but the earliest I can really think of when these two kind of it was mentioned with these two fighting was Max Kellerman did an interview with Errol Spence, and in that interview, Max Kellerman was asking Errol Spence about what is his super fight. And bear in mind, Spence just won the belt, so he was very much the new kind of kid on the block, and a lot of people were asking Spence who's the super fight. Keith Thurman was the guy at the time who had the belts. He was kind of saying maybe Keith Thurman, but Max Kellerman was very specifically, because you could tell, sometimes when somebody asks a question, they kind of want a specific answer. You could tell Max Kellerman, he meant Terence Crawford, and he admitted that, because he then said he then flipped the question. He first asked who would be the super fighter in your area at 147, then he asked who about people in and around you, meaning lower, above, and obviously Crawford coming up was the guy. And Errol Spence kind of knew that. You can tell he started laughing because he knew that was the big fight, and he was saying we'll see what happens with Jeff Horn and if he gets the belt. And sure enough, Crawford got knocked Jeff Horn out, won the WBO welterweight title, became a 3-division champion, and Errol Spence destroyed Lamont Peterson with Lamont Peterson's corner essentially stopping the fight, or maybe the referee. I forget that fight, but it was a beat down from Errol Spence and a good win. Lamont Peterson, very good fight, and I think it was as comfortable a win as I think I've seen for Errol Spence, and he showed again why he's the man at 147. Really established himself, showed that he was able to carry the pressure of being a champion, and we then got what I consider today maybe my favourite confrontation in boxing, maybe ever. Not say ever actually, but one of my favourite confrontation in boxing is, I don't know what the fight was, but basically Errol Spence and Terence Crawford were backstage. ES News obviously captured this with Ellie Setback recording the sort of moment between the two of them, and it was a great confrontation. One, because you could tell that Spence and Crawford have a lot of deep line respect for each other, but also there is a competitive edge, and it's not so competitive that it's disrespectful, and it's not like respect that it becomes like they're almost too friendly to each other. It's not like we remember with Joshua Klitschko, for example, how respectful those two were, and nothing wrong with that, but if I could choose how I would like a build up to be, I'd like it to be how it was with Spence and Crawford. As we've seen, those two, they've got respect for each other. I feel like they'll become friends after this, but if you look at the two of them, there's a real competitiveness between the two, and that I like. So I'll play the video, but this was probably one of my favourite confrontations. I'm not going to play the whole thing, it's very long, it's 11 minutes, but ES News, they captured it when Spence and Crawford met in 2018, and this is what it was.
That shit gonna be easy work. I'm solid as a rock. On that, that's fact. You got hurt by getting bull. You got hurt by getting bull. You got hurt by Ocampo. You got hurt by Ocampo. I got hurt by Ocampo. And you got hurt by Kelbro. And you got hurt by Kelbro. When? We seen you get wobbly leg. We seen you get wobbly leg. Then what? We seen you after that. It don't matter. After that. Wait till I hit you. Sorry. You gonna look like Benavidez. Yeah, one leg. You gonna look like one leg. Yeah, one leg. I'm gonna make you stinky leg. What you wanna bet on that? What you wanna bet on? You can bet 100,000 on that. Let's bet $1 million. Easy. Let's bet $1 million. You getting that money, right? Easy. Let's bet $1 million easy. What are you talking about? There it goes. We're talking crazy. That's Hey, this nigga still. Can I get a picture with y'all?
Okay, you get the point. These two were going back and forth, and it was one of the most exciting exchanges I think we've seen between two fighters ever. Two elite fighters, competitive but respectful. I liked. There was not respectful. There's a deep line respect between the two of them. You could tell. I don't know if his bet is going to hold up. By the way, it's $1 million bet that Crawford stops him, but whatever happens, we'll see. But in 2018. Obviously, Spence was able to also beat Carlos Ocampo. And for Bud, he beat Jeff Horn and was able to also beat Jose Benavidez Jr., in which, obviously, you heard Spence make reference to. And I think at this point, the fight was brewing. It was getting there. A lot of people wanted to see it. We then get to 2019 now. Crawford had fought twice in 2019 with Errol Spence fighting twice as well. Starting off with Crawford. Crawford had beaten... he had fought Amir Khan, in which Crawford dominated that fight. And he hit Khan low, and they tried to claim that it's... obviously, Khan tried to claim the low blow. And it was low, but it was his leg. It wasn't exactly his any lower. And I think... people say Amir Khan quit. I don't know if he quit, but he certainly looked like he took... not the easy way out, but it wasn't low the way it felt. I don't like to judge because I'm not in the ring. I'm taking these shots from Terence Crawford, thankfully, but I do think it's not. It didn't seem low. It's my point. It seemed low. It didn't seem like it was in the groin area, and that fight them got stopped. But Crawford, people could see he was winning that fight easy, and at the same time, he also then fought Mean Machine Kavalauskas, who he then stopped as well. However, Kavalauskas did knock Crawford down in this fight, and they never ruled it a knockdown, but it was clearly a knockdown. And again, that's what got people thinking, if he does that, what's Errol Spence going to do to him? it happens all the time. We see this in fights. And I think his fight was an excellent test for Crawford because he did get knocked down. But again, he showed how good he is, how much of a dog he is, and knocked Velasquez out. And it was an excellent performance. From Errol Spence's point of view, Errol Spence had then fought Mikey Garcia. A little bit, got criticised a bit because he's a smaller guy, and showed his boxing, acumen in there. He outboxed Mikey. Mikey couldn't do much. People say, oh, we didn't have the power to stop Mikey. Spence has the power to stop Mikey. It wasn't as if Spence was hitting him with everything. If you look at the difference between when he fought Ugas and Brook compared to where he fought Mikey, I don't think he fought that fight with the intention to go out there and hurt Mikey. He fought that fight, I think, to box on the outside, and he did that. Wasn't the most exciting fight, which you don't usually see from Spence. Spence is usually quite exciting, but it showed that Spence had developed his game at this point, and I think at this point you could kind of see Spence was slowly starting to become a bigger and bigger star, and he was going after all the belts. He'd then after that fought Sean Porter, and this was an amazing fight, back and forth. Spence essentially decided to fight Porter his own game, had a toe-to-toe war with him, and won. 11th round, he knocked Porter down, which essentially gave him the fight. And I think Porter deserves respect. A lot of people thought Porter was just going to get knocked out clean, but Porter's a dog, and people got to respect it. Same thing with Crawford fight. He showed that even though he loses to those guys, he's still a very good fighter and one of the best. And it was so competitive. Spence at this point, however, was the little moments like Spence looking a little bit drunk at some fights, and I think he had said, Spence, that I don't know if it was the Ugas fight or the fight with Danny Garcia. One of the fights, he said that he'd finally used a nutritionist. And I think it was good because Spence was looking like a middleweight at this point in time. He was looking very, very big. He was looking hitting the pads, and he still did good in the fight. He's still a dog, but sometimes, these little things can make a real difference. And Ugas, in my opinion, was his best performance, and that's when he did use all this kind of stuff. So it was an excellent fight, though, and obviously Spence got it done. And then we then go into the moment that I think a lot of people were thinking that this could be the end of Spence, and that was the car crash that he had, where he obviously drove his car and essentially got launched out and somehow survived. It was a miracle that it did. If you look at the video, that car got messed up, and Spence's face was crazy. I'm not sure. I think he had to get new teeth or something, and get his teeth fixed, and I think he had some bruising on his face. He didn't have anything broken, remarkably, but I tell you, it was looking very scary for Spence, and a lot of people, including myself, were questioning whether he'd be the same again, because then the year after that we go to 2020, which was a great year for everybody, as we know. Pandemic happened, and not many fights. Both Spence and Crawford only fought once. For Errol Spence, he had fought Danny Garcia, and it was an excellent performance from Spence. I'll give him credit. He didn't look as sharp as usual, I would say, but I think he's looked, obviously his fight before he was a lot better, but he fought very well and dominated Garcia. Didn't really look in trouble that many times. There's a few times his mouthpiece went out, and this was, I think he needs to get a better mouthpiece, especially for this fight with Crawford, because it happened against Ugas, as we know as well. His mouthpiece tends to fall out, but a good performance from Spence, though, and for you coming off of the life-threatening injury and fighting Danny Garcia, to me shows that Spence, without a question, has the better resume out of the two, and the fact that he fought Danny Garcia in his combat fight, I got nothing but respect for that. That is an elite mindset to fight somebody as good as Danny Garcia. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Danny Garcia is amazing or anything. He's a good fighter, but if you want to pick a fight to come back to, look at Tyson Fury when he came back against was it Sefer Seferi he came back against when he got overweight and had to lose all the weight and come back. It'd be like the equivalent, I think, of Tyson Fury fighting a Derek Chisora, or even like I wouldn't say Dylan White, but not actually that far off. It's probably somebody along them lines, and I think it was a real good move from Spence, and won the fight comfortably. And from this point onwards, then it kind of it looked like Spence then was going to look for them bigger fights. The fight with Crawford was still coming. At this point, people were running with this narrative that Spence was scared of Crawford and ducking him like boxing fans usually do. Wasn't the case, I don't think, but people always run with whatever narrative they feel they should do. So 2020, Danny Garcia, and for Terence Crawford fought Kell Brook, and a very impressive performance. Finished Kell Brook I have to remember. I believe it was about 3 or 4 rounds. I want to say it was 4. I think it was 4. But whatever it was, I think it was an excellent punch from Crawford. Essentially stopped him with a hook/jab hybrid of a punch and got Kell Brook teetering all over the place. Even though this is a very weakened version of Kell Brook, it's still a Kell Brook, and wasn't able to. Golovkin and Spence weren't able to do this. Obviously, they fought better versions of Kell Brook. I think it's pretty clear, but the fact that Crawford did essentially what he needed to do says a lot, and he got Kell Brook. The fact that he essentially had him with a standing 10 count and then went out there and just put it on Kell Brook. And Crawford is a vicious finisher, the best finisher in boxing. Once he sees you're hurt, he's on you. And it was a beautiful shot from Crawford. And I think Kell Brook tried to sort of mess in the middle range with Crawford, and I think it wasn't a smart thing to do because Crawford is deadly at that distance. But yeah, brilliant performance from Crawford though. How Kell Brook bloody and stopped him in the fight. And then we go to 2021, where again, this is where the fight is heating up now. First thing to be noticed, Errol Spence did have a fight with Manny Pacquiao made, in which it looked like those two were going to fight, and it was going to be a huge fight for Crawford. He looked annoyed at the fight. Crawford said that Pacquiao was scared of him because it looked like those two were going to fight. It was rumoured for so long. I wanted that fight personally because I would, in terms of the welterweight picture, I wanted both guys to have. I wanted Spence to capture the WBC and IBF, and I wanted Crawford to capture the WBO and WBA. Because then, I don't know, it gives both guys. I like that. I prefer when two fighters kind of collect belts by themselves rather than one fight collecting belts and then fight another world champion. But either way, Crawford couldn't get the fight. He seemed annoyed. And then Spence got the fight with Pacquiao. Now, Pacquiao, everybody wanted to fight because Pacquiao obviously is a legend. And Pacquiao also, old man. Personally, I'm happy this fight. I'm not happy that Spence injured. Obviously, the reason the fight did not happen with Pacquiao and Spence is because Spence injured his retina, which you have to be very careful of. Because that is, if you do anything bad to that, that's where you can lose your eye. But what happened with Pacquiao is obviously Spence injured his eye, and I think Spence would have really put a beating on Pacquiao, which is why I'm happy that fight didn't happen. Because you don't want to see a legend like that go out in a very bad way. I mean, look what Ugas did to him. You imagine what Spence would have done to him. He didn't look that good against Ugas either. So, yeah, I mean, Pacquiao, one of the greats, no doubt, but I wouldn't say I would like to see him against a Spence or a Crawford for that matter. Crawford, because Crawford's a good finisher, but he won't beat you down the way Spence will. Crawford will just stop you instantaneously, whereas Spence will be a prolonged beatdown, which I don't want to see. So, as a result, Pacquiao fought Yordenis Ugas, in which Yordenis Ugas beat Pacquiao. And during this time, obviously, like we said, Errol Spence didn't have a fight in 2021 because of the eye injury. So, if you look at Terence Crawford, though, fought Sean Porter, same man Errol Spence fought, to get the WBC belt. And this was the best name on Crawford's resume. At 147, Spence was at the fight. And Crawford got the stoppage, knocked him down. And then, believe it was the same round, got him down again in round 10, I think it was. However, the issue I always had with this fight is I don't believe that Porter was really that hurt. I think there was something with him and his dad. And that's what Derek James and Spence always, they say the same thing. You know, it wasn't as if Porter was wobbling all over the place. Porter was literally out here banging the ring canvas in frustration that he got knocked down second time. That is not a man who's hurt. If you're hurt, you don't do that. So, yeah. Amazing, though, because Crawford got told he was down, and then he just turned up a gear and then put a guy like Porter down twice. It was beautiful, accurate punching, and a wonderful performance from Crawford. A close fight, but he got it done. And I think this is when, you know, Spence ended up walking out of the fight because I think he didn't agree with how it ended. And again, there's trash talk between the two of them. Now it's heating up. Obviously, we know when fighters aren't fighting, the trash talk is almost bigger between the two. But then we go into, and at this point, again, people are running with this narrative, Spence is scared of Crawford and he's ducking Crawford. Again, BS, but it is what it is. And then 2022 happens. So, 2022. First, I'll start with Errol Spence. Errol Spence fought Yordenis Ugas for the both obviously not all the belts, but most of the belts are welterweight, with the IBF, WBA, and WBC welterweight titles on the line. And Spence, to put this bluntly, beat the brakes off Yordenis Ugas and destroyed him in the fight. And it was one of the most, one of the most impressive performances I've seen from a welterweight in a while. And I think Spence is a great fighter, but even this opponent surprised me. He got hurt, I think it was round 6 or something like that, where he let his mouthpiece come out, and that might have been the worst thing that Ugas done, because it just feels like it almost annoyed Spence and just made him go after him. And one thing to note as well about this fight is that this fight was the first fight that Spence took after his eye injury. And if you think of, again, what I said about Spence, he fought Danny Garcia after coming off a life-threatening car crash. He fought Yordenis Ugas after coming off a terrible eye injury, which could have blinded him. Errol Spence does not take tune-up fights. This is for sure. And it was at this point when I think it had reached boiling point with Spence and Crawford. Everybody wanted to see them fight. I think people had enough of the posturing. It was kind of looked at as an example of, oh, look, these two won't fight each other. And a lot of people, like I said, ran with this narrative that, oh, Errol Spence was afraid of Crawford, didn't want to fight, was ducking Crawford, all this. And then Errol Spence, the way I look at it, whenever people say Errol Spence was ducking Crawford, I always play in this interview. Spence had always said he wanted to take all the belts at 147. This was his goal from a long, long time. And if I look at what I'm gonna play the interview here, this was the interview, the post-fight interview after Yordenis Ugas. Now, obviously Spencer, they asked him about the questions about the fight, his fitness, about when he got hurt, the performance he put on, all that kind of stuff, and he gave great answers. And this is what the question that obviously, I think it's Jim Gray, proposes to Errol Spence, and this is the answer which he gave in relation to who he will fight next.
What's next? Oh, well, everybody know who I want next. I want Terrence Crawford next.
You're gonna make that happen?
Huh?
You're gonna make that happen?
Oh, definitely. That's the fight that I want. That's the fight everybody else want. Like I said, I'm gonna get these straps. I'm gonna go over there and take his shit too.
All right.
I think that is the most comprehensive response I've ever seen. People say you're afraid of a man, but yet you're coming out calling him out. Spence was never afraid or ducking Crawford, I should say. Maybe afraid is the wrong word. He was never ducking Crawford. He always wanted that fight. I think he just wanted it at the right time when he got all the belts, and then he just had to get his. I think Spence came up with a line, I didn't play in the interview, where in that confrontation with Crawford back in 2018, he talked about taking an easy route. Now, a lot of people sort of saw that as him saying he'll take the easier fights and then he'll fight Crawford, which people didn't like that. I don't really get the complete issue with this, because I like the idea, again, of if you're making a fight undisputed, I think it should be the best versus the best. I think Spence and Crawford are fighting at the right time now. I don't think they should have fought in 2018 when, Porter already had the belt. I think it was not. I like the fact that it just adds more to the fight to me with all the belts on the line. And some people take it as that. Some people also take it as Spence saying the easy route being the easier fight to make. Whatever Spence meant by that. 2021 or 22 even. That was when Spence obviously calls Crawford out. Finally, officially says it, that he wants to fight. Everybody knew that Crawford wanted it. Everybody wants to fight. It was the fight to make, clearly at that weight class. Crawford's case, or what happened with him, he split with Bob Arum, went with I think it's BK Sport or whatever it is that he started, and fought David Avanesian in this fight, and dealt with Avanesian with ease. Wasn't really anything amazing. Avanesian, he was talking about fighting. He obviously gave Conor Benn, always talking about fighting Conor Benn. He fought who did you fight out Avanesian? Josh Kelly, I think it was. That was it, Josh Kelly, and put in a fantastic performance. And obviously Kelly's got the that sort of background, the amateur background and all that kind of stuff. So everybody was very much thinking that Avanesian could do something to Conor Benn, but that's what he was. He was just a very solid fighter. And against Crawford, he's not on the level, and Crawford showed this, dispatched him with ease. And Now, 2023, we finally got the fight made. July 29th. It is going to be fantastic. It's going to be one of the best fights I think boxing has seen for a long time, and I can't wait. Terence Crawford, Errol Spence. I will do a preview as always. It'll probably be in the next video or maybe the one after this one. But I can't wait. And this is just a recap of what happened with Terence Crawford and Errol Spence throughout the years. It's been a long road, but we're finally here. And yeah, I'm very excited. So yeah, Crawford, Spence, great fight. And until next time.